You keep hearing dementia care advice that says, just lie. Go along with it. Tell them whatever keeps them calm. It's therapeutic. It's being compassionate. When you tell the truth plainly, they might become distressed. When you try to redirect, they may get angry. When you try to explain things, they start to accuse you of changing the subject. And when you avoid the conversation, their distress comes back. Now you feel trapped between two options: to tell the truth bluntly or to lie to keep the peace. But those are not the only two options. The reason you do not know what to say is because you've not yet interpreted this actual situation. Hey, Christian Care Companion. Welcome back to Dementia Caregiver Support for Christians, a work of DigniCare by Design. At DigniCare by Design, we provide direct access for Christian caregivers who are carrying complex responsibilities when their caregiving situation is changing and information alone is no longer enough. Because many Christian caregivers do the research, they read the books, they listen to the podcasts, they get told just validate, they get told just to redirect. And they have been told, just like you and me, not to argue with a person living with dementia. But what we have not yet been helped to do is how to interpret what faithfulness actually requires in your real situation. Today, we are going to look at what happens when dementia care advice tells you to lie, but your conscience tells you that lying is wrong. If something has changed in your caregiving situation and what used to work is no longer working anymore, go to dignicarebydesign.com/start. Today's episode is not a how-to episode. It is a why-to episode. Because before you know what to say, you need to recognize what the question is that you are actually facing. Now back to the episode. The questions that are often surfaced sound like this. I've been taught to redirect. Isn't that lying? Or how do I validate without lying? What should I say when they ask for somebody who's died? What do I say when they tell me they want to go home? But those are not the deepest questions. The deeper questions are, am I being asked to accept lying as being compassionate? Or am I being pressured to judge the care I give only by whether or not things are easier? Am I trying to control the moment instead of stewarding it faithfully? And what does truth require when the person in front of me cannot understand or receive the whole truth? What do I do? What does it require of me when the easiest path is for me to say something false? These are the real questions beneath the question. Therapeutic lying rests on this false premise. If a lie produces a good outcome, then the lie becomes compassionate. Or if deception calms my person, then deception was the loving thing to do. That, my friend, that Christian Care Companion, is what the world tells us to do. That is the world's way of reasoning. The world asks, does it work? But Christians cannot stop there, because for the Christian, the question is not only, did this work? The question is, did this work faithfully? You and I, we do not get to rename sin as being compassionate because the situation is painful. The 9th commandment tells us, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. And this is not limited only to lying under oath in a courtroom. We are also taught that the 9th commandment requires us to maintain and promote truth between man and man. In other words, we're not only to lie, but we are to promote truth between us and the person that we're providing care for. And that is important because your loved one with dementia is, by definition, your neighbor. Your dependent person is still a person in the eyes of God, and their cognitive impairment does not make them someone that we are free to lie to or deceive. Their vulnerability actually increases your and my responsibility to steward truth carefully for them. Psalm 15 takes this deeper. Psalm 15 describes the one who may dwell with the Lord as the one who walks blamelessly, does what is right, and speaks truth in his heart. This is important because truthfulness is not only about avoiding a technically false sentence. It is about our integrity before God. It is about what kind of person we are becoming as we walk this journey before Him. So when a Christian caregiver is troubled by being told to lie, that is not being rigid. It is your conscience telling you something important. It is your conscience recognizing God's truth. The Christian caregiver cannot and does not leave truth behind when we start taking care of somebody living with dementia. Now, I know at around about this point, somebody says to me the following, but what about Rahab? Rahab's story is found in Joshua 2. She hid the Israelites' spies and misdirected the men who came looking for them. Later in Joshua 6, Rahab and her household were spared when Jericho fell. In the New Testament, in Hebrews 11, verse 31, it speaks of Rahab's faith, and James 2:25 speaks of her receiving the messengers. But this is where we have to be very careful. The Bible commends Rahab's faith. It shows that she identified herself with the people of God. It shows that God, in His mercy, preserved her and brought good out of a very tangled, moral, unclear situation. But it does not mean that Scripture turns lying into the right thing to do. The biblical narrative is not permission for us to build a caregiving technique or a caregiving method out of flat out lying or deception. God can bring good out of our sin, out of our fear, our confusion, and our mixed motives. And He does that through the work that He has done. But it does not turn our disobedience into obedience. So when somebody says, Rahab lied and the outcome was good, therefore lying can be compassionate, they're reasoning from an outcome instead of from what the Lord has revealed in His law. That is the same false premise beneath the technique called therapeutic lying or therapeutic deception. If the lie calms the person, then that must be good. But Christians, we cannot reason that way. We do not get to take a morally complicated moment in biblical history and use it to justify a worldly caregiving practice of saying what is false on purpose. Rahab's story does not give us as Christian caregivers permission to make lying therapeutic. It reminds us that God is merciful in complicated situations, and it does not erase the ninth commandment. It also doesn't change the fact that Christian caregivers are called to speak truthfully, love faithfully, and care wisely before the Lord. It does not turn our sin into obedience, and it certainly does not make lying a Christian caregiving strategy. This is dementia. Yes, your loved one may not understand. Yes, they likely do not remember the information. Probably they're not able to reason. They may not be able to hear the whole truth at that moment. They could be afraid. They might be suspicious of you, or they could be asking you for somebody who died. They certainly can tell you things like, I want to go home, when they're already at home. And sometimes they're living inside a false belief that is entirely real to them. In those situations, Christian truthfulness also does not mean correcting everything that comes out of their mouth, forcing them to acknowledge every fact in order for things to be right. For us explaining things until they agree because it used to work, repeating painful details that actually make them upset, or using truth like a weapon because you don't want to lie. We are not required to say everything that is true, but we are not free to use what is false to make them feel better. Therapeutic truth-telling is the Christian alternative to therapeutic lying. This is not harsh truth-telling, beating them over the head with the facts. This is not just blunt correcting. This is not arguing because you know they're wrong in what they believe or in the facts that they're telling you. This is not forcing somebody with dementia to live in our reality if their brain cannot hold it. But it is also not lying. Therapeutic truth-telling recognizes that dementia changes the truth the person may be able to hear as it's being presented. Dementia changes how we speak the truth. Dementia changes whether or not we correct and whether it is wise. But dementia does not make telling a lie faithful. Therapeutic lying literally says a falsehood is justified if it calms the person. Therapeutic truth-telling says I must seek to comfort, simplify, redirect, and love my person without using deception as my tool. This is where many caregivers want a script. They want to know exactly what do I say when this happens the next time. But before you know what to say, you need to recognize actually what is happening, because a script or a sentence may not fit in every situation. The question might be fear or grief or disorientation or pain or overstimulation or being in an unsafe place or a family member pressurizing you to tell a lie. Or you might need different words when you're more exhausted. Or you're having a conscience issue that nobody has actually stopped to help you name. This is why generic dementia caregiving advice is no longer enough, because this is not only a communication issue, this is an interpretation issue. Now, when you are standing in the kitchen or beside the bed or at the door or on the phone with your siblings that is telling you just to go along with it, you are not dealing with an abstract dementia caregiving tip. You are dealing with your real caregiving situation. You need to separate what is true, what your loved one believes, what they can actually hear, what they are afraid of, what safety requires, what love requires, and what your conscience is resisting, and then what faithfulness requires of you next. That is not solved by more information alone. That is why Christian caregivers need direct access to care advising. This is not because you're incapable. This is not because you're not trying hard enough. But this is because the situation is becoming more complex, that generic advice is no longer sufficient. Have you been told to lie and your conscience has not been at peace? Have you been trying to choose between telling the blunt truth and a compassionate deception or lie? Have you accepted the idea that as long as it calms the moment, it has to be right? Have you avoided the deeper questions because you do not know what else to do? Have you been asking yourself, what do I say, when the deeper question is, what is actually faithfulness in this particular situation? That is the moment that it's time to stop gathering more generic information and tips and techniques and start to look at your own caregiving situation clearly. And if this is where you are, if the dementia tips you are hearing do not fit your situation and your conscience, do not keep trying to solve it by getting more information, doing more research. I invite you to go to dignicarebydesign.com/start. And that is where I want you to start to name your actual caregiving situation that is in front of you. It shows you what is happening, what has changed, what are you being told to do. It'll indicate to you if your conscience is troubled. Where does the advice being given to you by the world not fit the responsibility God has placed in front of you? Because when dementia care keeps changing, getting more information is not usually enough anymore. So when your conscience is troubled, you do not need somebody to tell you to just ignore it. You need help in recognizing what faithfulness requires in your actual situation. The reason many people do not know what to do or say is because they have not yet looked at and interpreted their actual situation. So if you're ready, go to dignicarebydesign.com/start. Start there, name your situation, and begin recognizing what kind of help you actually require. And as I end all of my episodes, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and I will see you in the next episode.